who was the very first white man to come to Spokane, Washington, build a house and live and stay here?
I know his first name is J-A-C-O.
Jocko Finley. Very good. That guy there. Now that's an artist's conception. He lived before the time of cameras, so we don't know exactly what he looked like, but I like that picture because it reminds me of how I think he looks like. Okay, I want to tell you all about Jocko Finley, and I want to tell you how he came to come to here, to Spokane, Washington. Okay, he was born in 1768. Now in 1768, the British controlled all of North America. We had not had the Revolutionary War yet. George Washington lived back in Mount Vernon. And the biggest thing happening in all of North America was the fur trade. Now what does that mean, fur trade?
They trade fur from like gophers, and they're looking for mostly like beaver.
Right. Beaver fur was the biggest thing happening in all of North America. What did they want beaver for? Yellow shirt.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I think they wanted it for like to make like pelts and stuff.
Well, the pelt is the fur before it's torn off. The hat! That's right, the hat! The British and the French and the Europeans were crazy about hats made out of beaver fur. Now, the women had big, round, black ones, and the men had top hats, and then the Army had those three-pointed ones like in the Revolution. The Navy had great, big, tall ones, furry. They were crazy about those hats, and they were made out of beaver. Now, they trapped all the beaver in England and Europe. There wasn't any left. They came to North America, and they found beaver everywhere. So suddenly, the hat was the rage. Okay? Well, how are we going to get those beaver and make them into hats? Right. Sounds good to me. Okay, so how are we just going to, one person go out and trap as many as they can? How are we going to get lots of them? Traps, okay. How are we going to get lots of them? Hundreds of them.
There's a lot of people.
A lot of people. Now, all over North America, there were these what people? There was a few of those, but they came later. Before the white men got there were lots of what kind of people? North American Indians. That's right. Okay? Native Americans. Now, the Native Americans didn't have knives and guns and blankets and material and pots and pans. All they had was rocks and animal hides. And they wanted the stuff that we had. And if we gave them knives and guns and blankets and horses, and they would go out and trap the beaver for us. We could get lots of beaver. We could send them to England and make what? Hats. Okay. Jocko Finley's father, he was born in Scotland. He came to America. He had enough money to get started in a good business. And the best business he could get in was what? Hats, beaver, fur trade. So James Finley, where's Scotland at? In Europe, over by England, right? Okay. He come to Canada. Where's Canada?
It's like British.
Right. It's only about 100 miles away. It covers all of north half of North America is Canada. Okay, so he comes to Canada and he goes and buys a bunch of knives and guns and blankets and pots and pans and beads and baubles and all the things the Indians wanted. And he goes way up into northeastern Canada to build a trading post. What's a trading post? Pink shirt.
Basically a place where people go to trade.
Right, exactly. Perfect. Okay, so there's French and there's Indians, and they're already up there. They're already trading and trapping beaver, and all he's got to do is go up there and build a trading post, and he can trade and get lots of beaver and make lots of money and have lots of fun. Yes, ma'am. Oh, and that's going to happen. Let me get into that here now. So, he goes up there and he builds this trading post along the Saskatchewan River in a place called, we got our, all right. Now, I got to tell you guys something. Any day that you see a bald eagle, a moose, a beaver, a bear, that is a blessing because you can't choose to see them in the wild. They have to come to you. Okay, now let's get back to James Finley. He builds his trading post up on the Saskatchewan River in a place called the Nipawin. Now, Nipawin means the gathering place. And that's where the Indians would gather, and the French and the English, to trade and to do business. He built a little trading post. And that's where Jocko Finley was born in 1768. Now, his mother was half French and half Indian. His father was from Scotland, so he spoke English. Taught English to his son. His mother taught him French and Indian languages, so he could speak to everybody. He grew up on the prairie in the wilderness in Saskatchewan, and he learned all the things he needed to know to survive up there. He learned to hunt, he learned to fish, he learned to trap. He learned all about the fur trade, how to catch beaver, and he learned to survive in the wilderness. He'd spend all winter out trapping beaver. In the summer, he would hunt and fish and do those kind of things. When he was 8 years old, his father moved to a new fort about 800 miles away, a bigger fort with more people, and he learned more things. Now, Jocko Finley was 15 years old. His father moved back to Montreal, and Jocko may have never seen him again. You don't know for sure. But Jocko was okay because he was smart, he was strong, he knew how to hunt and fish and trap and survive, and he knew all there was to know about the fur trade industry, and he could make a healthy living doing that. And that's what he did for most of the rest of his entire life. He worked in the fur trade in various different positions. He trapped, he hunted, he worked for the Northwest Trading Company. He was considered the highest paid, well, him and one other guy, the two highest paid employees of the Northwest Fur Trading Company. So he must have been good. He was up there. By the time Jocko was 30 years old, he had gone 1,000 miles farther west, all the way to Alberta, Canada, to Rocky Mountain House Trading Company, where he was, again, the highest paid employee of the Northwest Company. Now, we have an issue happening. We started out trapping all the beaver out of England. We started in eastern Canada trapping out all those beaver. And as they get trapped out, which direction are we moving? Well, no, we're already in North America. We're in Canada now. We're working out of Canada. So we're going which direction? West. There you go. We're moving farther and farther west. Okay, by the time Jocko's 30 years old, he's already up to the Rocky Mountains in Alberta, 3/4 of the way across Canada. Okay, and now the beaver are getting scarce, and it means they've got to cross the Rocky Mountains to keep trapping beaver. Now there's a problem with that. First of all, they're getting farther and farther away from England and eastern Canada, Montreal, where the beaver have to go to get sent to England, and all the trade goods that they need to trade, the Indian and French, who are doing most of the trapping, have to come to where they're at. Now we're going to cross the Rocky Mountains. Now, Jocko had a very close business partner, companion. His name was David Thompson. Who's here has heard of David Thompson? Okay. You know what, Dave? Tell me what David Thompson did. Tell me, do you know anything what he did? Or I'll just tell you. I like to call David Thompson the Lewis and Clark of Canada. Now, what did Lewis and Clark do? Right. Crossed the Rocky Mountains, discovered the Columbia River, followed the Columbia River all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Now, David Thompson, he wanted to do the same thing, but he wanted to cross the Rocky Mountains way up in Canada. Now, up in Canada, the Rocky Mountains, the highest mountains in North America, they're 10,000 feet high, and that's just where the pass. They go up higher than that, and it can snow up there all summer. So, the bosses, they came to David and Jocko and said, "Have you guys ever crossed the Rocky Mountains?" No. Said to Jocko, "Can you find your way across the Rocky Mountains?" And he said, "Yeah, I think I can." The boss said to Jocko, "Take your wife and your kids. Take all your tools, take a horse and a mule, and cross the Rocky Mountains, build a trail, and when you take a bunch of trade goods with you, when you get to the other side, build a trading post and start trading with the Indians. And that's what Jocko did in the summer of 1806. Crossed the Rocky Mountains, built that trail. And he built some canoes, because when David Thompson was coming by the next year, he'd need some canoes to get down to the bottom. Now, David Thompson, he was a bit of a whiner. He did not like Jocko's trail. He said, it's too narrow. It's too steep. Well, David Thompson obviously had never crossed the Rocky Mountains, highest mountains in North America. When he got to the canoes, the porcupines had eaten holes in them, and they were no good. He was mad. So he wrote a letter to Jocko's boss and said, Jocko Finley ought to lose at least half his wages, all of his tools, a pound of sugar, and a pint of tobacco for building such a horrible trail. Well, Jocko didn't like that at all. He got mad and he quit. I'm not going to work for the Northwest Trading Company if they're going to treat me like that. So Jocko went down to Montana and built a cabin with his family down there, and they started trapping beaver for the Hudson Bay Company. Now remember that Hudson Bay Company, because they're the big company. Northwest was smaller. And he's trapping beaver down in Montana. He's doing really good. He's not only trapping a lot of beaver, he's hunting and fishing. And he finds buffalo and deer and bear and moose and elk and huckleberries. He's doing really good. But David Thompson, on the other hand, after he crossed the mountain, he spent all his time hunting for that river, the one that was going to take him to the Pacific Ocean. He didn't get enough food put in. By spring, he was hungry. Okay, we got a problem here. If we take those beaver back around over the mountains and all the way to Montreal, it takes almost a year to get there. Because you got to go by canoe down the river, and you got to carry the canoe to the next river, and carry the beaver to the canoe, and down and down and down. If we can send a boat, a ship, a big sailing ship, from London or Montreal around South America all the way to Hawaii, stop at Hawaii and get fresh water and pineapple and get some Hawaiians, because they're the best paddlers and they know how to swim. The French don't always know how to swim. Then down to the mouth of the Columbia River, you can load the beaver on there and be back around in less than 6 months, half the cost. So that's the goal now in the fur trade. Find the river and go the other way. So Jocko's down in Montana hunting and fishing and doing great. David Thompson's hunting for the river and he's starving. Well, Jocko either lost his gun or broke it. I don't know which. And the only place to get a gun within 1,000 miles is David Thompson's trading post in Kalispell, Montana. So Jocko comes walking in and says, hey Dave, I need a gun. And Dave says, what are you going to give me for it? He says, well, I got beaver. You do? You have a lot? Yeah. He said, have you got any food? Jocko says, yeah, I have a lot. David says to Jocko Finley, if you'll sell me some food, I'll give you the gun, I'll pay you top dollar for all your beaver, and I'll give you your job back if you want it. And Jocko thought, yeah, that's a good job. He was the highest paid employee of the Northwest Trading Company. So he took his job back. Now David Thompson said to Jocko, what I want you to do is I want you to follow the Clark Fork River, named after one of the Lewis and Clark guys. I want you to follow that river till you come to a great big set of waterfalls, more like rapids. But they named them Thompson Falls, Montana. Now, I don't know who named it, whether it was Jocko or David Thompson. But he goes down to Thompson Falls, Montana, and he asks the chief, can I build a trading post on your land? Well, the chief said yes, because he knew the white man had guns and knives and axes and blankets and all the things that he didn't have. So Jocko builds Salish House Trading Post in Thompson Falls, Montana. And David Thompson shows up a little while later and says, good job. Good job. He liked that. He said, now Jocko, I want you to build me another trading post. I want you to follow this same river and it'll go up into what is now northern Idaho. Come to the biggest lake in northern Idaho. anybody know what lake that is? The big lake up north. Oh, way bigger than that. Ponderay, Lake Ponderay. It's still on the Clark Fork River. Now, I bet every one of you guys 5 beaver, you can't tell me what the name of the chief of the Indians at Lake Ponderay was. His name was Old Ugly Head. That's a true story. That is, I couldn't make up that thing. So he asked Old Ugly Head, says, can I build a trading post on your land? And Old Ugly Head said yes, because he knew he could get blankets and knives and guns and all the things he didn't have. And Jocko Finley built a trading post, and they called that one Kalispell House. David Thompson showed up and said, fantastic, good job. We got people to run this post. I need you to build me one more trading post. He said, Jocko, I want you to go to the land of the Spokane. You heard of that before? Where Spokane comes from. He said, find the Spokane River and follow it till it meets the little Spokane River. There'll be a big, huge Indian village there, because up that river comes some of the biggest, fattest salmon you've ever seen in your life. They're as long as you can reach, and they're big around as a fat hog. That's right. Aren't those are the little ones. They got even bigger than that. And they come up that river, and during the fishing season in that field out here, there'd be 1,000 Indians coming to fish for those salmon. And when they weren't fishing, they could go hunting for beaver. Sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? So Jocko comes into this beautiful, beautiful place. And you know, I think it looked a lot like it does today. Beautiful, big green trees everywhere. Warm and comfortable. And he went to the chief. Now, he wasn't the chief of the tribe. He was the chief of the fishery. And he asked the chief, can I build a trading post on your land? The chief said, why? Jocko said, because we want beaver. The chief said, why? Because Europe and the French and the English are crazy about hats made out of beaver. And the chief asked Jocko, what are you giving for my beaver? And Jocko said, I have guns and knives and hatchets and blankets and material and pots and pans and all kinds of shiny things. And the chief said, yes. Now, way down there through them trees, you can see there's an old log barn. Well, in 1810, that barn wasn't there. The Indians were out there. Jocko built some little cabins way down there by that barn. Maybe 3 or 4 of them. Like, no, I'll tell you about that. One for the family to live in, one for the beaver to be stored in, and for the trading goods. They were just little things. David Thompson shows up that next spring and he said, fantastic, good job. You guys are obviously getting along better now. And he said, Jocko, I found the river I'm looking for. It's just right down there. He said, Jocko, I want you to go with me up north of here to near Kettle Falls, the mouth of the Colville River, and we're going to build 3 canoes and 3 boats. Jocko built the canoes and David built the boats to see who could do a better job. Then Jocko come back here and stayed, and David Thompson, he took all the beaver he could gather up that they'd been trapping in Montana and Idaho and all there, and they hauled it down to the river and loaded them in the boats. And they took them beaver down the Columbia River all the way to Astoria, Oregon, where the British had built a trading post. And they sold them beaver to the British. And then David Thompson got a couple of them Hawaiians, and they paddled all the way back up the Columbia River, all the way back up to here. One of the Hawaiians, his name was John Cox. He came and stayed here with Jocko Finley. That's how we know. What's your question?
How much beaver did it take to make one beaver stick?
Probably a couple, not very many. You see the beavers are big old round things, yeah. Depending on the time of year they caught the beaver. In the winter, the hair is thicker. Okay, so David Thompson comes back up here, leaves off John Cox, and he paddles on up the Columbia River all the way up into Canada till he gets up to the foot of the Rocky Mountains, and he crosses the Rocky Mountains on that horrible trail and takes the long way home all the way back to Montreal. And he retires from the fur trade. Jocko's running Spokane House Trading Post from his cabins over there. And they're bringing in beaver from Idaho and Montana and all around the area. Then, a new company comes along. The Americans. The American Fur Trade, or the Pacific Fur Trade Company out of New York City, comes in here and builds a trading post right there. That's the Blue Rails. The American Trading Company brought 100 people in here. Now, to build that fort, they had to cut down a lot of trees. They had to keep it warm in the cold of the winter here. And there was lots of trees cut down, and they started trading, but they didn't do so good. You know, I don't think they were as good at this business as Jocko was, because they only lasted 2 seasons, about a year and a half, and they gave it up, left, packed up and left the country, went back to Fort Astoria. Well, Jocko comes over here and he sees this empty trading post. He contacts his boss and says, hey, there's an empty trading post here, let's move into it. And the boss said yes. So the Northwest Trading Company comes here. They bring 100 people. They bring trappers and traders and trade goods. But they got to make the place bigger and better. And they cut down a lot of trees to make it bigger and better. They got wall around it, and they got a dance hall, and they got a blacksmith shop. And they're trading for beaver all the time and just doing really good. Well, Jocko lives in the cabins. He lets the people down here do their thing. And he goes trapping in the winter and hunting in the summer. He's doing just fine. Kids are getting bigger and they're working hard. Well, what was that other trading company I mentioned a while ago? The big one. Hudson Bay. Now, the Hudson Bay Company was the largest trading company in North America, probably the largest trading company in the world. Well, they wanted to get in on this Washington West Coast, hang on. They wanted to get in on this thing. What's it called when you bring 2 businesses together? A merge. What's your question? You have your hand up. Oh, I'll tell you about that when we're done. What's your question? I'll tell you about that. So the Hudson Bay Company moves in here and they bring hundreds of people. They bring trappers and traders and trade goods. And they build the fort even bigger. The yellow rails represent the Hudson Bay Company fort. They built a dance hall and a blacksmith shop and a bigger kitchen and a mess hall. And they are trading beaver from all over Canada and Washington and Idaho and Oregon and Montana are coming in here, but they got a problem. We're still 75 miles from the Columbia River. That means those beaver got to go all the way down the river by horse and mule, if you can catch them, before they can get on the boats and be brought down the river to the ocean and around the ocean to England or Montreal. But they're still here, and they invite Jocko to go on some of the biggest adventures of his life. He went with Alexander Mackenzie down to the Nez Perce country down in Idaho and discovered the Snake River. And they brought back hundreds of beaver. It was a cold, miserable winter, but they still did very, very well. And Jocko came back up here, enjoyed the warm summer. And he went hunting for deer and elk and all that, and that kind of stuff. A couple years later, Jocko was invited to go on the biggest adventure of his life. He went with a man by the name of Peter Skeen Ogden. Now, I used to live in Ogden, Utah, so it was named after him. That's way down there. Jocko and Peter, they went clear up the Snake River to the Wyoming and discovered the Teton Mountains. Then they followed the Bear River all the way down to Utah and come back here with thousands of pounds of beaver. What an adventure. By the time they got here with all those beaver, the governor of the Hudson Bay Company said, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. We got to get closer to the river. So we're going to close the fort, and we're going to move the whole thing up to Fort Colville at Kettle Falls. And that's what they did. They took everything that wasn't nailed down. And if it was nailed down, they pried it up. They took the doors off the hinges to keep the metal for the hinges, because there's no metal anywhere to be had. And they took the shutters to take the metal off the shutters. And they took the nails out of the wall where they could. And then they left. Oh, but I forgot to say, when they built the fort, they cut down every last tree there was. There were no trees to be seen. They had to float trees down the river just for firewood. And then they left. But Jocko was down in his little cabins, and the Indians were all over this field in the fishing season, but the Indians didn't have any trees to make firewood out of. But Jocko, he's seen this big empty place that I'm going to live in here, big house here. Jocko come down and lived right here. The nice place. He put the doors back up where he could. But Jocko's getting old. And kids, nobody lives forever. In 1828, Jocko Finley died of natural causes at the age of 60 years old. But he told his family, I want to be buried under the corner of the fort under the old gun tower. They built a gun tower right here in the corner to defend themselves against hostile Indians. But Indians weren't hostile. They used to leave the gates open at night because they were good, nice Indians. But Jocko was buried right there. And then his family, his kids grew up, and they eventually left. They went to Montana and Idaho and Oregon and around different places. But the Indians were still here because the fish, the salmon, the fat, big salmon were still here. Until early in the 20th century, they built dams on the Spokane River. Yes, ma'am.
So if they don't really know exactly what Jocko looks like, why it is kind of forwarded, but like, couldn't they just like, you probably would have done like, but couldn't they just like,
They could. I'll tell you more about that story, and I wish I could answer that even better, but I can't because I don't know that. They built dams on the Spokane River, and those big fat salmon couldn't come up there anymore. So the Indians didn't have any reason to stay. A lot of them went to the reservation. Some of them moved on to farms and other places. Now Jocko is here all alone. But there was no trees. The Indians had burned every stick and board and log in the entire place, including the gun tower, including Jocko's cabins, were completely gone. Now, who can tell me what is an archaeologist? Let's see, lady in the pink.
someone who examines different items that are either above ground or below ground.
Very good, yeah. So the archaeologists come in here, and they want to find Jocko's cabins, because that was the first trading post. And they hunted all over the place over there, and they never found them. In fact, we still have never found them. But they said, let's find the Hudson Bay Fort. So they came down here, and they started hunting for the Hudson Bay Fort. Well, the first thing they found, yes, ma'am. Well, there had been enough history written about it. People like David Thompson, Alexander Mackenzie had left, something, and there's lots of records about the trade and the fort. But by the 60s, nobody was sure quite where anything was at. They went looking for the Hudson Bay Fort, and even though there was nothing left, they found down in the ground rotted off posts from the fence around it. And then they found where the kitchen was, animal bones and broken pottery and an old spoon and stuff like that. And back where the blacksmith shop, they found the clinkers, the stuff from the blacksmithing. And then they said, let's see if we can mark out where the fort was. So they started digging a trench right along here, marking the post holes where they were. And when they got all the way down here, where the gun tower was, they found a rotted old wooden coffin with some bones in it. But with that coffin and bones, they found a few interesting things. There was a pair of glasses, a cup and a knife and a comb, and some tobacco pipes. And one of the pipes had carved in it J.F. They had found the grave of Jocko Finley. Now they did something not very nice, in my opinion. They took Jocko's bones and they put them in a box, and they put him in the museum in Spokane, the Museum of Native American Cultures, and they put him under a cabinet somewhere where nobody could see it. And there it sat for 27 years. Jocko lived in a box under a cabinet. Now, something I might not have told you guys. Jocko Finley was my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. 5 greats. One of my cousins, part Native American from over in Coeur d'Alene, she was mad. She said, went to the museum and said, you put Jocko Finley back where you found him. I told her no. So she went to the state park and said, you put Jocko Finley back where you found him. Well, the state park says, we can't bury somebody in a state park. It's a park, not a cemetery. Well, she said, you put Jocko Finley back where you found him. In 1977, the Jesuit Catholic priest stood right here, and Jocko had his funeral. He dedicated this place as the final resting place of Jocko Finley. But there's one more thing. 2 more things. Oh, that spider won't eat much. Just slap him. Okay, listen up. Listen here. Don't look at the spider. Wait a minute. Let me finish, because the kids are coming. I'll run out of time. A couple years later, my great uncle, Walter Goodman from Chewelah, Washington, he said, hey, what about Jocko's knife and his glasses and his cup and his pipes? Put them back too. 2017, the end of the grave has a separate slab, slightly different color. A few family members gathered around, and Jocko's personal possessions were returned to where they had been originally found. One last thing I like to do. I like to say my own little prayer. I say, Great Spirit, dear Father, bless this ground, and Jocko Finley may rest in